Okay, my name is Belinda Goodenough, and I've been a special ed teacher since 1998, I think. But most of my experience has been working with homeschool families and the charter school programs in the state of California. However, I did spend 3 years in Beaumont, Texas after my husband passed away. I'm a widow, and I lived in Beaumont, Texas. I worked 2 years in the school district there and 1 year in the school district there, 2 years in a private school. But one of the semesters that I worked in Beaumont, Texas, I had the privilege, yes, and honor of teaching in a life skills class, which had, I want to get this right, I had 8 students. 1 was diagnosed with Down syndrome. 1 was diagnosed as ID, a little girl, our only girl, and the other 6 were boys diagnosed with autism. And I taught K through 3, K through 2nd. When 3rd grade, they went across the hall to the other teacher. So I guess you could say I had a classroom that should have been designed for students on the spectrum. And I'm going to write about my classroom that I had, and I'm going to write about, I'm looking at the APERS now, and I'm getting a better scope of what the assignment is about. But I had my principal, so that I could get a better understanding of a life skills class, sent me to 2 sites to observe. And one site was to observe the unique curriculum, which I am a very strong advocate for the unique curriculum. Beaumont School District had bought it and mandated that we teach it in our classrooms, whether we used it as a supplement or as a full curriculum. They wanted to make sure their money was being utilized. And so my principal wanted me to observe how the unique curriculum was used, and she sent me to another SDC class in the district that also had the same type of variety of students that I had, as far as children on the spectrum, children diagnosed as ID, and actually had a little girl with Down syndrome. Anyway, so they just called it Life Skills in Beaumont. They had Life Skills 1 and Life Skills 2. One of them were the children that were in the wheelchair that you had to feed and diaper. One group, I can't remember if that was 1 or 2. And then the other one was mobile, but they were all in life skills. And my class was mobile. None of them were in the wheelchair, although we did have a diaper here or there. Anyway, so the classroom that I observed, I was looking at the checklist and I read my assignments, and copied and pasted some of this to go into my paper. But the one thing that really struck me as odd, and I can appreciate now, I did not have the training when I was working for the Beaumont School District that I've had in the past 18 weeks, counting the 2 weeks in this course. If I'd had it, I would have really paid more attention if I'd had this APERS checklist with me. But one of the things that I did notice, and I'm going to scroll back up here, was the when you walked into the room, you had to go around a bookshelf. The bookshelf kind of blocked the view. It was a very small room, for one. It was not nearly as spacious as these classrooms that I saw in the video, and the ones that were designed by these students, and the writings that we had to read. But this, going around, I'm going to kind of go through the checklist a little bit. This tall bookshelf was a divider, and it really inhibited visual, and that was about the only negative. And it's coming up here to the classroom design, allow all students to be monitored at all times. This was not appropriate because they had a high barrier, or shelves were present throughout the classroom setting. This shelf, it was a bookshelf, and it was tall, and it just kind of, you had to walk around to go into the classroom and see. And they had the kidney-shaped tables, and they had 1 teacher per about 3 students, one paraprofessional for 3 students. It was a very small group. They had about 6 kids in this class, and it was smooth. The curriculum was working. The teachers were efficient. Everything else, positive affirmation. She had a little clothesline across the room, and it had sentences, words on the clothesline. And this one little girl diagnosed as ID was reading the words and pointing to each word on the clothesline. So this teacher was very ingenious. She was very creative. She had a lot of pluses from the rooms that we were looking at on the videos and in the scale drawings. But it was such a small area, and it was like, honestly, to be honest with you, I felt claustrophobic, like I was smooshed in there. Everything was hemmed in. And she had the unique curriculum. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but she had printed out the books in black and white, and the students were following. The unique curriculum is divided into level 1, level 2, level 3. If you weren't aware of it, and you probably are. But anyway, and these students were mostly level 1, but the paraprofessional had at her group some students that were more of a level 3 in her group, and they were doing the tracking the words and reading and asking questions and answers. And it happened to be a social story, as in the little girl was not wanting to share the basketball, and she went through the whole, what were her feelings and how did she feel, and these students were mirroring and trying to express to the teacher in their limited verbal manner how she was feeling. As far as everything else, the unique curriculum, she had assessed each of her students so that she knew exactly what level they were on. And she also gave feedback, like continually. She and her teammate, her paraprofessional, gave instant feedback to the children. I did see a token rewards on one of the boys' tables, so I take it he was on a behavior monitoring kind of plan. Visual schedules were up. They were foretold, not forewarned, they were foretold when there would be a transition, and they had plenty time to prepare for that transition. They, of course, were walked, monitored to and from wherever they had to go. They would go to PE, and then they would go to lunch and come right back. And, of course, they sat with them at lunch. The paraprofessional did with the students. The teacher would have a break, and the paraprofessional would go to the PE with them and have lunch with them. And then she would come back and take her break, and the teacher would have the kids for some downtime. But it was just a very smoothly ran classroom. I was in awe. And my principal also sent me to what we call the ABC classroom to observe. And this was where all of these children were probably what we would call mild to severe, as far as kids on the spectrum, all 6 of them. And this classroom had 2 students per 1 adult. I feel like that was ideal. But the children, when I walked into the room, there was no acknowledgement of my presence from the students. Their eyes were downcast or glazed or staring, but there was no verbal. It was a very quiet classroom. I'm sure it's not always that way when I was in there, because I was a stranger and had my clipboard with my note-taking. But there was one teacher with 2 students at her table. She was the one with the certificate. And then there were 2 paraprofessionals with 2 students at their tables. And it was very, I want to say, closed. It was a very tightly ran organization. The structure was very structured. And I see I'm at 8 minutes and a half. I do tend to get gabby on these things. But it was very, it was interesting. I'm telling you, I was in awe of this woman and how well ran her class was. Again, there were visual schedules. This class had a token chart on every desk, taped. And there was there were the pegs for the coats. There were cubbies for the kids. There was a bookshelf, but it was a low bookshelf where the kids could go get a book for quiet time. There was a corner, calming down corner. She had the sensory tools and the sensory, equipment in the room. I noticed there was a small trampoline, for jumping, and kinetic sand for touching Play-Doh. It was very, very cool classroom, and I'm almost out of time, so this is me signing off. On to write that paper. Have a good day.